Hi, I'm creating this video to give a real-life example of a company that had to reorganize a portion of its business to a shift in their strategy, which happens regularly. So when we think about organizations, we don't think of them in organization structures. We don't think of them as being static. We think of them as changing and reacting and being fluid and being created to enact whatever changes in strategy a company is going through. This particular company was called J.C. Whitney. I worked with them for several months before I actually started doing this work to create a new plan that started with a change in strategy. So a little bit of backstory. It's a family-owned business. It has been started in 1915. Sold most of their products, which were automotive aftermarket products, would be the industry they were in, and they sold those through catalogs directly to the consumer. They'd launched a website in 1997, which was actually fairly early for companies in that space anyway, and sold a huge number of products, 55,000 plus products shipped out of a 300,000 square foot warehousing facility in LaSalle, Illinois. They had 300 to 400 employees. Most of those were in LaSalle. And their strategy, when I first got there, was basically they said, we're everything automotive. That was their slogan too. It showed up on a lot of their advertising. And it's not a very good strategy. It's because it's not defined. And it needed to be a little more defined. What they really were a direct seller of products, automotive aftermarket products, to specific markets. And they just happen to cover a broad range of them. So that's kind of where the everything automotive came from. The core advantages that they had in the marketplace were they had a very broad offer. And then because you had to think about the actual fit of a product. If you've ever bought windshield wipers for your car, for example, and you go to the auto parts store, and there's these big, huge catalogs that you have to look up your make, model, and year of your car, and it tells you exactly which wiper to get. There may only be like 6 windshield wipers, okay? But the right one, the right fit is exactly what you need. And that's true generally of the automotive aftermarket industry. And if you put together all those different combinations of things, it's into the millions, okay? So, believe it or not, they had all that data available to them and built that and made it very easy for the customer to find the right product. Primarily sold through catalogs, back in the good old days of catalogs, and through a general catalog, a specialty catalog. Specialty catalogs went into specific markets. The general catalog had a lot of different things in it. That's really where the everything automotive came from. The specialty catalogs they were in, there's 7 different titles. Like, for example, this one here for ATVs, and people who own ATVs, and on average they're mailing out 3 to 5 catalogs per month. The competition that they had was very specific for each one of these markets. So the general catalog had lots of different competitors, essentially, that it was competing against. And a trend that was going on were men who had previously gladly worked on their cars, and they actually enjoyed doing the work, that DIY, which stands for do-it-yourself, work was declining. People were not doing that stuff anymore. Cars had gotten more complicated, and the population who was interested in doing that were getting older and wasn't interested in doing their own work like that. So the performance of the company, as you can imagine, was not doing that great. It was flat to slightly declining growth. The active customer file, or the people who buy on a regular basis, that was also slightly declining. That's a bad sign for a company like this because that predicts future sales losses. The actual profit margins were decreasing due to the mix. Marketing expense was growing up by a huge percentage, and that was having a big hit on the bottom line. It wasn't all bad. There were some bright spots. The specialty catalogs themselves were doing pretty well. They were increasing in sales and profits, and the new website was starting to really contribute something. So right now, at that point, J.C. Whitney was structured very functionally. There was the president, there was the functions of IT, finance, and human resources, and then there was also the functions of the business itself, operations, customer service, marketing, and merchandising. We're going to concentrate on how marketing and merchandising were structured, because that's where the primary issue was from a strategy standpoint. So the traditional they had a traditional catalog focus pre-1990s. There was On the marketing side, marketing was basically in charge of customer acquisition, customer management, um, customer retention, all those different types of things. When we think about the customers, that's what was the realm of their responsibility. And merchandising was responsible for the product side of the business. They were thinking about what of those 55,000 products, which ones to sell, what prices to sell them at, how to promote them, how to present them to the customer. What's the logical mix of products to have? There's the director of marketing, had a marketing analyst, other people to help them understand the customer file side of it. And there was the creative side of it that actually produced the materials, the catalogs, the ads, the web pages, all those other things. They did all that. Okay. Merchandising had a director of buying who was in charge of the group merchandising, people called group merchandise managers, which were roughly broken out by product types. Buyers that worked directly with them, who were responsible for making sure that, all the products were set up right and all that kind of stuff. And then that whole thing to manage those millions of iterations, that was done by the data input department. And then the inventory under merchandising also was managing the inventory itself, how many they had of basically inventory is making sure they don't have too much, but have enough that when customers order it, they have it. So, this required a strategy realignment. It was a strategy shift, not getting out of a business and getting into a new one altogether, but rethinking exactly how they're going to market and what they need. So there's a lot of choices to make. Were they a catalog company? Certainly a lot of catalog companies thought of themselves as catalog companies. That's what the current organization was. Were they a multi-channel direct marketer? They were selling through multiple channels to get to the end user. So they were selling through the catalog itself. They were selling through advertising. They were selling through the web. So multiple channels to get to it. But ultimately what it was, what they were was a multi-market automotive aftermarket company selling directly to the consumer into very distinct customers and individual markets. And once you recognize that's what they did and that's where their success was from, you can see where that kind of would create a shift in the strategy. And the question becomes now, how should this company be departmentalized? Should it be functional as it is right now, by product area, by process, by customer, by geography? There's a lot of different questions that had to be asked and answered. And what kind of structure does that lead to? Is a functional structure like it is now, or does it require divisional structure, or maybe a matrix structure? So all those things kind of came into play with the realignment of the strategy to this, recognizing these distinct markets. It made sense that the organizational structure fell in line with that change in strategic focus. So we actually created a new role. It was called product market manager at first, but ultimately it's truncated to market manager, who is going to be in charge of very specific teams. And we're going to look at that in 1 second. There's a new category management structure. That whole merchandising area got realigned. It was completely out of line with what the strategy was trying to do. And created a cross-functional team pairing marketing, creative, web people with the new market focus. So driven by the markets. That's what the market manager was responsible for. And they were self-managed teams. The team created their own financial and strategic growth plans for their markets. They created team performance goals, sales, profit, customer growth, the key measures. And they competed for budget resources to support their growth, amongst the other markets. And that was what the executive team was responsible for. And the director level management team kind of coordinated and managed it all. So this is what the new structure looked like. It was a matrix structure, as I mentioned. We took these functional areas. We still had this team up at the top who basically drove the strategic direction of the entire organization, and then broke it down. And then what was being managed, the day in and day out management of it, was being done by the market manager. So we had a market manager for Jeep and ATV. By the way, we didn't add people to do this, so some people doubled up in roles, and that was okay because the marketing area itself was already aligned that way, so they didn't feel like they were shifting that much. But this whole idea of self-managed teams was a very new one, and they took a frankly, quite a long time to actually get it fully accepted within the management structure at J.C. Whitney. So market managers broken down, and then we had merchandising managers who were responsible for the products that went into it, and the buyers basically had the same type of role, but were aligned into these markets. And the reason they're different colors is it illustrates that some of the people doubled up. So if you see a green circulation manager, that's the same person. They actually were on 2 different teams, which was okay because each one of them had distinct objectives and goals, and very unique views towards their markets. And also broken out by creative, again, very similar to what was already being done, but now aligned into what the overall goals are for this particular market. And on the e-commerce side, because it was kind of emerging, they aligned into this new market structure because it made sense. So this is what got put into place. By and large, it was fairly successful. It took a long time to get in place and accepted, but once it was, it really worked, and the teams really did a great job building up those individual markets, and that success continued. So kind of reversed the trend. I think the sales when I got there were about 125 million a year. We got those up to almost 200 million in a couple of years. So it actually worked out fairly well. So that's a real example of how the organization serves the strategy. And that's a really, really important point to take away, because sometimes you go into organizations and they don't serve what they're trying to do. They weren't built up in the proper way. And this realignment that has to happen now and then is okay. That's part of what you expect to have happen within a business. I hope that's helped you understand the concepts, and certainly don't hesitate to ask me any questions if you have any regarding this.